Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to have a great conversation today. You know, when we put together this session way back in 2019, prior to COVID, it was going to focus on how the trends in online and digital would continue and what new trends would emerge over the next decade. It was really like looking back on the 2010s and saying, well, what's going to continue and what might change with the innovators of the last decade. What we've begun to see is that the changes that we would have anticipated over the over the next decade have accelerated greatly. With our guest today, we want to learn a little bit more about how 4 leaders in digital education are approaching this moment. How are they thinking about COVID? How has COVID created new opportunities? And what strategies do they see over the next 10 years? We have with us today 4 leaders from 4 different types of institutions. We have Greg Fowler, president of Southern New Hampshire University's Global Campus. Gary Brahm, Chancellor and CEO of Brahm University. Beryl McEwen, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs for North Carolina A&T University. And Dick Senese, President of Capella. We're going to jump right in because we have a little bit of time and a lot of really good conversation to get into. Recently, I've heard a lot of leaders talk about how COVID has really changed higher education's views about what is sacred and what is essential. From teaching programs never thought suitable to online to managing labs virtually. What has COVID challenged about your institution's assumptions about online? And are you seeing new, previously thought impossible or impractical opportunities emerge in this moment? Gary, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we all had kind of settled into our way of doing things, even though we're innovative, our innovative way of doing things. But clearly, it accelerated a lot of changes that we saw coming. Probably the most significant thing we did, we had a lot of programs that were online already, but we do a lot of immersions. Our doctorate in education has immersions. Our doctor of nursing practice has immersions with simulation labs. Things that people always said, well, you can't do those virtually. You can do them virtually, and not only can you do them virtually, but you can do a great job of it, and the faculty love it, the students love it. And so, we did things we hadn't done before and learned that actually it wasn't easy, but it can work. We learned a lot about student services. Now, some of what we learned about our student services, because we offer very, very intensive student services, were really that they were good, that you need to have very low student to advisor ratios, one-stop student services. You need to have more high touch during this period. So we actually learned we were doing good things there, but some other areas where, for instance, we had a lot of online students because they were getting veterans benefits and they couldn't take it online, then they needed to take it on ground. And we have campuses around bases. And so these veterans who get their housing allowance based upon teaching being done on ground, were able to move online. So they all moved online seamlessly. The VA made their changes, actually the Department of Defense, to allow them to continue to get those benefits. So that really worked out for them. And so, in general, it forced everybody to be a lot more, flexible and look at how they do things. One of the interesting things was that it wasn't just going one direction. In June, we were allowed to launch our nursing program, and that June was a pretty intense time in California, you may recall. And we launched our nursing program. The nursing faculty were great. The students were great. The first week we launched, and it was face-to-face, right, at a time when nobody was doing face-to-face. The first week, on a Wednesday, one of our students said somebody at home was identified with COVID. That the student was tested, they were fine. That Friday, the student was tested positive. And so we had that cohort going. The faculty were fine, the students were fine. 2 weeks later, the student came back. And it was really remarkable that cohort continued with no problems through now. We launched a second cohort in our nursing program. And so that's just to call out nurses, because no matter what, it's all about the people. Nurses they start off as students being amazing. Our nursing faculty are amazing. And so, we owe such a debt of gratitude to them. but you really see it as students and as faculty, how they have really stepped up, and nothing bothered them. And you could see how in other programs that wouldn't have been the case. So it's accelerated change. If you're nimble and responsive to it, it really presents opportunities.
Yeah, and Beryl, I've heard you talk about this too, that this moment, like really how the institution has stepped up. And in the case of your institution, of course, primarily residential, but really a leader amongst the HBCUs and online. What new opportunities have emerged from this for you?
The opportunity, I think, to expand our offerings, expand our reach, expand access to our institution, because we are committed, we're a land grant institution, we're committed to understanding the needs of the community and being very responsive in the kind of programming that we provide. But as you said, we have been a residential campus primarily for a long time. And as the provost trying to grow our online offerings, I have heard all kinds of excuses why this or that or the other cannot possibly be taught online. And then came COVID-19 and we had no choice. And it was amazing to watch the very same people who a month or two ago protected their programs by literally saying, no, we can't do this. We want to see our students. We want to touch them. We're a very high touch culture. They made the transition within a week. Within 1 week, we trained all our faculty on the basics of teaching online, using Zoom, using Blackboard, which is our course management system, and making the basic adjustments that they needed to engage with their students online. But as I said, we're a high-touch campus, so we also had to learn how to do academic advising online, how to do tutorials online, how to do all the kinds of support services that we provide our students. We had to bring all of those into a virtual space. And people learn. And now, my challenge for the spring of 2021 is to get enough people to teach on campus. That's the challenge I'm facing for 2021 spring.
And it seems like, I mean, it's interesting that we're seeing that in higher ed, because, we talk about that a lot in the corporate world. It's like, oh wow, nobody's ever going to come back to our offices again, or we're going to treat our offices like clubhouses, I think is something I read a couple mornings ago. But the fact that that's happening on our campuses is really sort of mind-blowing to me. And someone who grew up, in the pre-online era. Greg, this sort of reminds me of something you've talked about in sort of the experience. And I know SNOOS put a lot of focus on, like, what is that learner experience? What does that learner journey look like? How are you all thinking about it? Because in many ways, you've had to design these experiences before. And how are you seeing new things pop up?
We're certainly seeing some of the opportunities to rethink or revisit some things that were sort of considered basic assumptions about learning. One of the big things that I think we're seeing across the board in this conversation around what people are considering remote learning versus online learning is this conversation piece about, is there a deliberate design in the experiences that we're putting in front of our learners? And do we understand why we do those things? I think most institutions across the country are having to revisit all of the assumptions about why they do those types of things. And it's a great conversation to be having, but it's also a very challenging one to sort of get people to be reflective about every type of thing you put in front of them. So whether it is discussion boards for connections or discussion boards for engagement, whether it is simulations and how you integrate those various types of things, whether it is the way you instruct, is certainly one of the big conversations that we see happening across all of our different types of experiences. As you know, SNHU has a 3,500 seat residential campus, as well as the students that we have online, and having that dialogue go has been a big part of the conversation as well. As Beryl said, it's also this conversation about the non-academic elements and the services that are provided to that. I think one of the big things we are seeing across the board is the conversation about students who are in their homes as parents, who are trying to homeschool and students who are at home with their parents trying to learn, and all the anxieties and stresses that go along with those types of things. Because many times when our students don't succeed, it's not necessarily the academic content, it's the other environmental features that are, causing issues for them. So we've had to spend some time being very deliberate about those types of things as well, and thinking about how do we deal with mental health and stress issues, learning disabilities for the various populations that we are trying to serve. Again, an important conversation to be having deliberately, and it's an important thing that we are looking at as we continue to move forward.
Yeah, and this reminds me, Dick, I've heard you say that COVID is really allowing us to rethink our sacred cows. And one of the things I think about sort of being the sacred cow is some of those experiences, particularly sort of for campuses that are on ground. How are you seeing, what sacred cows are you seeing challenge at Capella?
Sure. Well, people think of Capella and they think of us as entirely online. The correct adjective is mostly online, right? So in our clinical skills programs, our accredited counseling program, our accredited programs in nursing, social work, et cetera, we had historically been having those residency experiences face-to-face, right? And so we had to work really closely, and I could not be more proud of the fellow leaders, faculty, and staff at Capella. We had about 2 weeks to pivot all of this as we saw the inability to conduct those sessions in face-to-face environments, and then working with accreditors who, sort of like Beryl was talking about, who maybe said, no, you will always do this face-to-face, do a fast turnaround and say, yeah, I guess we can let you do it online. And then to pick up on what Greg said, to intentionally design those experiences. Capella's been online for most of its history. And so we understand that technology isn't the thing, it's the medium. And you still have to design the andragogical experience so that your learning is happening in the online environment. So some of the sacred cows that we were able to confront were some of the clinical skills training programs, some of our doctoral research seminars, which we have been conducting face-to-face. Keep in mind, as a doctoral granting institution, we also had to work with our doctoral candidates to redesign all of their studies, that those who were planning to do face-to-face kinds of data collection. In our placement programs, Gary mentioned that in education, the same held for us. We have students in practica or internships across a wide array of programs and disciplines. And how do we quickly pivot to accommodate those in sites that will allow it, to help those who are in sites maybe that won't, maybe find a telehealth opportunity, work with the state licensing boards. So it was a lot to undertake quickly and address a number of sacred cows held either by us, by accreditors, by licensing boards, by a number of other places. So really proud of the work that we were able to do.
Love to pivot. Obviously, all four of you are leaders in your markets and have been for quite some time. The thing that's been on my mind is, how in many ways you've had competition, but you've also benefited from there's not a lot of people. Most institutions are still very early coming into this space. With CARES Act money coming in and virtually every institution having to at least do remote and digital, how are y'all thinking about new competition that's coming out of this? I mean, surely many of them will go back to campus and be very happy to sit back in their classrooms. But if Beryl's campus is any indication, we may see whole campuses and faculty previously unthought say, hey, actually, we prefer to teach online. We want our institution to be more online. What does this mean for your four institutions? Feel free to just jump in here.
So at my institution, we have had just a very small percentage of our courses and our degree programs online. So for us, we see this one of the benefits, if one can describe benefits of COVID-19, to be this challenge to academics who often believe strongly in what they believe and are not often the ones who are championing change. And sometimes you have to be so gently moving people in a direction. And here we are. We have been forced into an environment that people are now beginning to trust and to believe that this can be done well, this can be done effectively. So from our perspective, we see this as an opportunity to expand. We see this as an opportunity to serve more people who want to attend our institution, but who were challenged by just the geography of the whole thing, or the costs associated with having not just to pay for tuition, but having to relocate to come to school. So we don't imagine ourselves becoming SNHU or anything of the sort in the online environment, but we do see opportunities to bring the North Carolina A&T brand to many more who have desired it for a long time. And now we have faculty and academic leaders who believe we can do it and who are willing to move in that direction.
You know, I would just challenge the idea that this is a zero-sum question. It's a positive-sum question, right? The world needs more of what all of us are doing and what many of our colleagues do. The world of work is changing. Every profession is changing rapidly. As an online institution focused on adult workers and adult professionals, you know, there's going to be an ever unending demand for lifelong learning, for reskilling, upskilling, changes, et cetera. And so it calls on us to just be our best, right? You know, whether it's our Flex Path program, which we have as our direct assessment offering, others have direct assessment offerings as well, keep leaning into that and to make it unique, to make it differentiated, to make it distinctive in some ways and get really good at things online so that it attracts folks and so that we're meeting the needs of employers, that we're using the most innovative technologies, that we're meeting the needs of working adults. I think it was Greg who commented on how complex all of the lives of our learners are becoming, the lives of our faculty, the lives of our staff. So we have to keep leaning into professional relevancy, flexibility, affordability, et cetera. And then it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I don't think that it's, I totally agree with you, Dick. It is, there are literally tens of millions of opportunities out there. And one of the things that I think has benefited my colleagues who I spend actually a good deal of time talking to around the country, like Dick and Gary, is around this conversation of how do we help each other, because the pie is very, very big. And I think being able to learn from each other has benefited all of us as we continue to move forward. When we think about where we are right now, one of the things we're talking about is what is this next generation going to look like, and how do we continue to learn from both the things we do well and the things that we don't do well? How do we learn, for example, which bright, shiny objects we shouldn't be chasing, which things do we do well, which things actually contribute directly to our mission, and which things should we partner on? A lot of the work that we do right now is in partnerships with others who are tied to the work that we are trying to do. Sometimes that is EdTech partners like LMS platforms, sometimes that is community partners who also do a lot of the social services that support our students as well. But being able to participate and engage in that way is one of the things that I think will continue to allow us to evolve over time as we continue to think about these types of things. The other one is, I think we continue to move forward with just a better sense of what our students need and what works for our students. So things like analytics, things like learner experience are things that we're paying far more attention to as we continue to evolve moving forward. And I think this is going to be the case more and more for higher ed, is being able to take that approach that has often been seen in some ways as too corporate, but allows you to serve your students much better as you're moving forward.
Right. So let me be a little bit contrary here. There's no question that pandemic is creating greater acceptance to online learning. Everybody's finally getting it, and it's not just obviously it's consumers that are getting it. It's the potential students, in addition to the institutions as well, and the faculty at the institutions. That's creating an environment where they're more receptive to doing online education. But at the same time, it is in effect a high-tech business. Scale really does matter. If you are going to design a high-quality class or a high-quality program, we could spend a year to 2 years designing a high-quality program and a lot of money. That's something that a smaller institution can't really do. And when you look at how many students are going to take a class that we've spent a lot of money designing, well, is it better if 100 take it or 1,000 take it or 10,000 take it? And so and as is the marketing, as is all these other things. There's a lot of software that's involved. There's a lot of technology involved. There's a lot of really sophisticated staffing involved. And the more students you have, the more of that you can do. And so it will be interesting to see how it evolves. Whether there ends up being more concentration, which is probably likely in an online education.
So there's we're running a little bit up on time to be before we get to the Q&A, but you know there's a couple things I heard there. Like one is you know, obviously this is a tech play, that there is a there's you know, the bigger you can get, there's a lot of actual sort of value in being able to do that. So there's going to continue to be competition and focus on growth, but also like this is a big opportunity and this is a big space, and we're part of what we're doing here. And Beryl, I heard this to your point, is like we're bringing more people into the system, and we're actually able to reach more. That piece, and I would be amiss if I didn't sort of call out something there that you said around the working adult learners, since I'm with Guild. That seems like particularly sort of critical for this moment in time. We millions of Americans. Greg, you said tens of millions of opportunities. I would say tens of millions of Americans right now are really struggling. Many of them changing careers, changing jobs, and trying to figure out what's next for them. This feels like the moment for higher ed, and particularly the moment for online higher ed. You know, rapid fire here. How are your institutions thinking about serving so many of the Americans who are trying to figure out what's next?
So I'll just say really quickly, because I want to make sure it's rapid fire, that I agree with the idea that this genie is not going back in the bottle, but how it continues to evolve is one of the things that we have to think about. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how to be learner-centric, which is a term you're hearing more and more about, which is how do we bring the learning to the people who need it, as opposed to creating a one-size-fits-all. And that includes understanding where they're going to struggle, how they're going to need us to, you know, be thinking outside of the box. How does equity play into this, particularly at a time when there are so many technology tools out there? How do we use technology to actually decrease equity rather than increase it by bringing new technologies to the table as part of the conversations that we're thinking about as we move forward?
You know, and I would just say three things really quickly. One is through our programs like FlexPath, direct assessment. You kind of go at your own pace, more or less, right? And that creates a lot of flexibility for learners, some who want to go faster, some who actually don't want to go faster, right? With subscription periods and all of that. Working more closely with employers. You know, increasingly employers are creating opportunities for their employees. So how do we work with employers and to help them better use their tuition assistance to know that the money they're investing in their employees are really helping their bottom line. And then finally, you know, Capella University is part of a larger enterprise called Strategic Education. So Sophia Learning, you know, being able to access courses that are approved by the American Council on Education, recommended for college credit, accepted by thousands of institutions. Dev Mountain, Coding Bootcamp, Hackbright, changing the landscape of software engineers by focusing on helping women advance in technology. All of these opportunities have to come together in a creative ecosystem to really help working adults.
Yeah, let me jump in. So yeah, a number of us are doing competency-based direct assessment, competency-based education, which allows students to move through at their own pace. A lot of people have time now. So we're finding that it is really suitable, especially during the pandemic. It's really well priced. And so it provides a lot of value. We have embedded credentials that provide immediate value to getting a job. That's part of that. So that's really important. I think the big area where a lot of unemployed people can benefit, they aren't so much wanting to go back to school to start a degree. I mean, that's a long path. It's to get a credential, and to get a credential that carries academic credit so that they can continue on to get a degree after they get the job, hopefully at a guild partner or one of our partners, to where they could do that for free. But you know, there's no question that stackable credentials is going to be a big part of the future, especially if you have an employer who will fund it, or if the Department of Ed moves to where they will fund it.
Yes, I totally agree. Our corporate partnerships that we have, and there are many, help us to understand what the workforce is demanding, what the workforce needs, and therefore help us to focus our offerings on meeting those needs. And then community engagement. We try to remain connected to the community, understand the needs of the community. If people are losing their jobs, they're losing their jobs, but they still have basic education. They oftentimes will still have some job experiences. And if we can connect those through micro credentials to the needs of the business community, then it's a win-win for everybody, including us. And I value very much what Gary said as he was ending, that when we do this, if we can also look a little bit into the future and try to make sure that we are able to help these folks who come in and do these smaller courses or modules or certificates, to combine them and stack them into some of the degrees that make them even more valuable and more marketable later on, then I think we really do add value.
So that's a great ending point, and actually roll into some of the questions that are coming in. I mean, we ended there with talking a little bit about connecting with our workforce, talking about experiences, and talking about stacking credentials. We're really sort of focusing on that adult learner, particularly as many more of them have potentially be coming into higher education over the next year. One of the first questions that jumped out at me is, what role do you foresee in non-academic providers like Google and Amazon playing in providing learner experience and credentials in the coming years?
I think it's going to be increasingly important. You know, it's going to be increasingly important to talk about sacred cows for institutions of higher ed to become more flexible and more understanding of other educational experiences and how that can come in as sort of transfer, right? I mean, sometimes we have trouble transferring, and I'm a psychologist, used to teach intro psych. I'm sure it was the best ever intro psych class, but you know, we have to recognize that transferability needs to be loosened up. I'm part of the task force on American Council on Education, and it's really clear that we have to really go after that as a sacred cow and really help everyone understand that people are going to be bringing more varied learning experiences to the table as more and more working adults come back to higher ed.
I'll just pick up on that because I do believe the example I use a lot, sometimes in welcome circles, sometimes in unwelcome circles, is the minute that Napster came along, we knew that listening to music had changed forever. And it was very hard for the music industry to get its head around the idea that people don't have to buy a $15.99 CD to get the music anymore. And I think that some of the opportunities, certainly over time with them, became, you know, iTunes and Spotify and Pandora. For higher education, this is going to be an opportunity to think about, again, how and why we do what we do, and what are the opportunities to think outside of the box about those types of things. The example of iTunes, for example, is people listen to more music now than they ever did. They just do so in a different way. and the industry had to be challenged to take that up. In the same way with higher education, I do believe people will continue to need more and more a dynamic environment to be able to do those types of short-term learning experiences. So Google and Amazon are pushing higher education in the right direction to rethink and redesign itself in a way that's going to be useful.
Right, and the fact is that these really strong corporate learning and development departments understand working with universities and are willing to modify what they do to make sure they optimize the transferable credits. And so whether it be Walmart Academy or others, you work with them, they appreciate that we have certain standards that we have to adhere to, and they work with them to optimize the value to the organization that they're providing to the organization and the value to the student. So it's a win-win, and it's a real partnership with corporations that we need to be doing going forward.
And that experience gives the learner more confidence that they can complete, whether it's a certificate or a badge or a credential of any kind of degree, because they've already done that, right? And so it helps all around.
And I think some of these large companies that you mentioned, Terah, really do need to practice being good corporate citizens. There are rural communities all over this country. There are inner city communities all over this country that are still suffering from lack of capacity to access the internet, and therefore to benefit from any of this that we're talking about right now. And businesses are in business to make a profit. I accept that, and I believe that, and I think that's right. But I also think that every once in a while we have to expand our commitment beyond just that, and do understand that when you help to develop a community so that they can now access higher education, there's another consumer that you have created who will then be buying your products and your services. So I hope that among the things that large companies will do is that they will help to expand access to the kinds of technology that support learning, expand that to rural and some of the urban communities that do have a big need.
Really important point, particularly as we think about how this recession has unevenly hit various parts of our economy and really sort of hurt certain aspects of our society more than others. One question that just came in, sort of ties back to the moment in time where there's a lot of uncertainty of what we're seeing in politics and what this is going to mean for the future of higher ed is it's unclear if when there might be another stimulus package or when Congress will tackle higher education's reauthorization. What are some policy proposals that you think would help learners and institutions right now, during COVID and after?
Well, I'll start. I think aid for people getting credentials would be really helpful. It's tricky to do. A lot of times they have to be embedded in degree programs, but anything they can do to facilitate these shorter term credentials, micro credentials would potentially be very helpful for a lot of students, especially during this period of such high unemployment.
I think any effort that can be, or resources that can be put into helping people to use this downtime, for want of a better word, when they are not employed, to go to school, to go back to school, to let this prepare them for the next opportunity that will undoubtedly come. We are going to get through COVID at some point, and the economy will begin to return, to become vibrant again, and the workplace will need strong employees. So if the economy is not able to support the levels of employment that we desire and that we need, maybe this is a good time for our leaders to help to support these very people to prepare themselves for when things change.
So I think that I'm going to take the equity theme here and go with the idea of anything that we can do to give access, to pick up on something Beryl was saying a little bit ago. And when I say that, if we're going to have to be online, how do we take some of the tools that might otherwise not be being used computers, for example, to provide to people who otherwise might not have a computer? How might we think about the resources and mobilize both the government and the community in ways that will provide those to people that will, sort of lessen these education deserts that we talk about when it comes to the spaces where people don't have those. In addition to that, how do we take up some of the other needs, again, beyond just the technology, and think about in the communities, some of the basic needs? It's still hard, whether or not we're in COVID or not, for people to learn if they're hungry. How do we mobilize the community around that? How do we mobilize the community around some of the counseling issues? And these things don't require, long debates and legislation, but they do require some type of leadership and organization that will allow people to continue to move forward in the short and medium term.
I agree with, all my colleagues here. I think on a big picture scale, how do we get at the internet, access to the internet, particularly in rural areas, but even in urban areas, that last mile, that connectivity is really important. And in a more educational policy nerdy way, how do we accelerate the move to having hybrid direct assessment so that you don't have to just do a direct assessment program or just do a traditional program? The department is moving in that direction, and I think that's the right move. We've argued for that for a long time, and I would like to see that move quickly.
Agreed.
Yeah, it is, I think what's most exciting to me in this moment is like these moments of sort of extreme pain are when great innovations come up, and maybe they're hacked together in the initial moment. I talked to a president the other day that said at the beginning of COVID, to reach rural students, they literally took the Wi-Fi routers out of the buildings and were hanging them from the telephone poles and telling students, come and park and work in your car. But like, how do moments like that lead us to thinking about reaching people in online, or how can this sort of moment sort of highlight our complacency around hybrid assessments and really allow us to focus in and address on some of these things that maybe we've been doing the way we have, just through sheer inertia instead of because it's necessarily the right thing to do. We have about 5 minutes left here, and I want to go to a question I've heard a few times since the beginning of COVID, and that is, you all invest in very high quality online education experiences, and you're continuing to invest in. If anything, what will come out of this moment, I think what I'm hearing from this conversation is you're going to find new ways to reach students. You're going to find ways to do things that you didn't do online now. You're going to find creative ways to think about assessments, to think about experiences, to get technology in the students who can't reach it. Like I'm an optimist at heart, and I come away from this conversation with, wow, this is a moment of real pain that we need to sit with, but there's going to be, like, I think as a community, we're going to find more creative ways to help people because of this moment, and we're going to be helping more people at the end of this. Simultaneously, though, there's a lot of institutions that are doing what we wouldn't necessarily call online education. It's remote. And our students don't necessarily know the difference. They don't know that what they're getting from their small school that's never been online before is different than what they might get from any one of your 4 schools. Are you worried about bad experiences sort of tainting what is online education and tainting the name of online education in sort of in an inverse, creating almost a push against online after this moment?
I think you've actually seen that in some of the articles that you will see in various journals right now around "See, we told you so," as something that a number of people are doing. I often say that remote learning is like trying to learn to swim in the middle of a flood. It's one of those things where you have to do to mitigate the circumstances, but you're not going to win any Olympic awards by trying to do it that way. A lot of our work has to be in having these conversations with the various stakeholders in the community around what works and what doesn't work and how it does so. Even with our residential campus, being able to talk to them about things like not just stackability, but deliberate design and authentic assessment, and how there's learning science that's very much tied to the work that we're doing right now. This is not just, when I first started teaching as a professor, they told me it'll be about 3 years before you actually master the classroom. You'll just sort of wing it until then. That's not, and all of a sudden you get into a field, you begin to understand there's great assessment work around this that's been done. So I want to make sure we actually have those conversations with people and have them understand that this is not simply a widget, but actually something that requires a lot of deliberate work.
We try to distinguish between them, to make sure that our faculty and our students understand that there is online learning where courses are designed to be delivered without the boundaries of time and space and to be very engaging. And then there is remote learning where probably I'm sitting on Zoom working through some things with my students and making sure they continue to learn, because that is the best I can do.
I would just say real quickly, there's a lot of people in the higher ed ecosystem, associations, et cetera, accreditors, that need to lean in and help create better understanding.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues is that the Department of Ed, importantly, gave a waiver. Normally, if you go beyond 50% of your classes being taught online, you have to get approval from your accreditor. Right. And the Department of Ed gave a waiver to that so people could go 100% online immediately. That was important to do. They are right to do it. But at the same time, maybe the accreditor should have noted who has actually been approved to teach online and who is operating under temporary authority by the Department of Ed. That would have, at least they would have been able to see these institutions have been doing it, they've been approved to do it, versus these are doing it to solve a major problem. And so that would have been helpful. But clearly there's no question that, some people say it's opening their eyes, online education is great. Some are saying, aha, I told you so, it isn't so good. So there's no question.
Well, I think that we are out of time and about to be shut off. I just want to thank you all for taking time to chat with us today. Great conversation. Can't wait to see what all four of you are going to be doing over the next few years.
Well, thank you. And thanks
you
everyone.
very much.
Thanks so much.
Being with you.